Globalization in China by Joe Stefanski, Steve Fiegel, and Sergio Lopez. Even before economic reform began in 1970s, China's economy had a large share of industrial output, almost 50% of GDP. However, China controlled less than 1% of the world trade in 1977. Until 1978, industry dominated by large state-owned enterprises, SOEs. Structure of China's secondary industry changed fundamentally during 1980s. Share of agriculture has gradually fallen from 33% in 1985 to 15% in 2002, changing its focus to a more industrial country. The catalyst for this change has been the Chinese government opening up to allow the country to develop a market-based economy. China realized that in order to be successful in today's global market, it had to open its markets to international investment, embrace the market economy, and reap the benefits of capitalism. The decision resulted in less state-owned businesses and allowed the people of China to create their own businesses, which was a major key to the success of these businesses and China as a whole.
I'm Joseph Fansky, and in the past 3 decades, China's economy has undergone enormous growth, having an average growth rate of 9.7% per year and an increased growth rate of 11% per year between 2003 and 2007. And now we have a short video about the globalization in China.
Cars, clothes, chicken. They're selling fast in China, whether the brand is a hit back home or not. We're at a Kenny Rogers Roasters. It would be hard for you to find one of these restaurants back in the United States because the company has gone bankrupt. But here in China, the restaurant chain is finding its legs in the market where dying brands come to live.
While the US and Europe struggle, China is becoming a big and important consumer market on its own. That growth is giving old, tired brands from the West a chance to reinvent themselves.
Brands like Buick. In the US, many see it as a car for your grandmother. Here, the GM label has been a swanky top seller for years.
Most of our buyers, the average age of our profiles is below 40, so it's not a historical old image, it's a new image that's been based off great heritage.
For decades, Chinese consumers were closed off from the world, shut out of international media and consumer trends.
Some of these brands have a long history. So these brands go back maybe 50 or 60 years in their native country. But obviously China wasn't open in those days. So people aren't aware of those brands because they weren't really in China.
Now China is encouraging its people to spend. Many are building brand loyalty as they discover products that had their heyday overseas long ago.
This is a popular mall in Beijing, and it's loaded with brands. Cerruti is a French fashion label that outfitted stars back in the 1980s. Canton Kerwin is a British band that's almost obsolete back in the UK, and sports clothing line Kappa was all the rage in Italy decades ago.
And the spending here could help feed a revival back home for businesses like Kenny Rogers.
He is like Colonel Sanders of KFC.
Even if these Chinese diners aren't quite sure who the American country singer is. Here's you, CNN, Beijing.
Kenny Rogers Chicken, who would have guessed? Now that's globalization at its finest. Moving on now, we have a short graph here about how the foreign direct investments have affected China from 1983 till 2002. As you can see, as soon as that foreign direct investment started getting into China, there was a large increase in overall exports in China. China's booming economy drives up prices of minerals and metals. Oil imports rose by 30% in 2003, exceeding those of Japan. Due to the amount of resources China was consuming, it was referred to as the Hungry Dragon, as you can see in the illustration down at the bottom. Raising problems of supply encourage local growth of needed resources on top of large amount of imports in China. Now in China, the clean energy and renewable sector is increasing. The use of wind, biomass, photovoltaic, coal bed methane, and related policy reform has been a big increase in China. Globalization in China. Due to the financial crisis in 2008, China has experienced a slow decline in its economic growth. The third quarter of 2008, economic growth dropped to just 9%, the lowest it has been in 5 years, which was the financial crisis also affect Americans greatly. Even a small slowdown of the economic growth can yield disaster for China because of its increased amount of farmers moving to urban areas to find new jobs.
Hi, I'm Steve Fiegel. This is globalization in China in the 1980s, and this is globalization in China in 2013. And as you can see, we've come a long ways. China in the 1980s, following the economic reform introduced by the government in the late 1970s, the real per capita consumption of peasants rising at an annual rate of 6.7% from 1975 to 1986. Urban areas had corresponding figures of 5.5%. The improvements of the standard of living were demonstrated by a boom with a considerable increase in the ownership of television and other appliances. Globalization in 2013. China residents have seen their yearly earnings multiplied tenfold since 1980. This has led to a lot of urbanization and increase in the standard of living. In conclusion, China has changed dramatically in the last 4 decades due to the globalization. The Chinese economy impacts every country now and will continue growing immensely. And this is our bibliography. Thank you.